Hey everyone, greetings from a very cold state of Florida, and welcome back to Deviant Off Script, the edition of Deviant where we talk to some of the most fascinating people in crime and true crime. Just a reminder, check out our Patreon by visiting www.deviantpodcast.com and visit us on social. Follow us, interact with us there at deviant.podcast on Instagram and TikTok.
As a human flock, right? Uh, I think we are always so confused about how somebody wanders so far outside of us, right? How did they end up so far outside the flock?
I've been enjoying these interviews with Andrew, just doing solo chats with some really interesting people. And I'm excited to be back here with you all, but it won't be in this interview either. This is going to be Andrew speaking with his good friend and former colleague, Ashleigh Banfield. And Andrew, you have a long history with her.
We do. We worked at HLN for years together. She is, I'm biased. I think she's top notch in all the ways as a person, as a journalist, as a colleague. And she has a new podcast coming out called Drop Dead Serious, which is out now. And she talks about that. She talks about what that's about. And it was also really cool and kind of an unflinching conversation about journalism, her career, growing up in Canada when she knew she wanted to work in news. We hit a lot of interesting things that frankly, when she and I worked together, like we just never really had the opportunity to just kind of sit down and chew the fat together. So it was kind of nice to do that.
Yep. So get ready for some fat that is being chewed with Andrew's conversation with Ashleigh Banfield.
Ashleigh Banfield, you have a brand new podcast coming out, Drop Dead Serious. I have wondered when you were going to get into the podcast game, and here you are.
It was because of you. Little known secret for all your listeners and your viewers. Drew and I worked together for several years. One of my favorite people on the planet. Smartest, best producer of all time.
You're the one who said that just because you're here.
I mean it. You were the one who said you got to get into podcasting. It's going to change your life. So it's because of you, my friend, that Drop Dead Serious is now alive.
So tell us all about it. What's the concept? What's the idea? What are the stories that you're doing?
Sure.
Just kind of walk through the show.
So what I'm eventually going to be doing every week is just a basic wrap up of what's going on in true crime in the week and chewing on some of the biggest issues. Clearly, I get a lot of really, in-depth coverage in my Banfield show on News Nation. But to start, I'm dropping a 6-part series right off the bat. First 2 episodes will drop. Then each week will be a subsequent episode on Peter Nygard, who is the Jeffrey Epstein of Canada, but worse. I mean, if you were to take Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, and Diddy and put them all together, Peter Nygard would dwarf all their numbers combined. He was just a serial prolific rapist for 50 years.
Oh my God. And you're obviously Canadian.
I am.
So you know this story kind of better than most, right? Because you're kind of plugged into, this whole thing. Walk us through that if you can.
Right. Weirdly, the reason I'm doing the story is because, and the story is called Uncle Peter for a reason. I called him Uncle Peter. I grew up with Peter Nygard. His niece was my childhood best friend. I was around him all the time. He was friends with my mom. His sister, my best friend's mom, was close with our family. I spent a lot of time in that house, and I have such a strange perspective on what the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s have been like for sex predators, because I remember well us all thinking he was very Hugh Hefner-esque. He would show up for Christmas dinner with like hot, scantily dressed women on either arm, random people that the family didn't know. And, you just kind of shrugged your shoulders and said, that's Peter. He's a ladies' man. And it was always referred to that way and considered that way by family and non-family alike.
Yeah, because it's interesting. It's kind of a perfect example of, like, obviously times have changed, right? And like we'd look back at stories like Peter Nygard, and I think a lot of us see a lot of like instances where it was like, how did that just fly?
Yeah.
Like, how did that just kind of like, it is what it was. Like, people just kind of
Right.
like, it's weird to look back and think about those stories like that.
Because I'm old as dirt, I lived through a lot of it. I will tell you, I remember hearing regularly, well, she was wearing a short skirt at the bus stop. What did she expect?
Yeah.
And also, there were laws saying your wife, a wife can't be raped. Prostitutes, well, they can't be raped. Everybody was very different about women's sexual autonomy back in those days. And so the first default position for anybody who might have come forward, and very few did, because he was
Mm-hmm.
so rich and so powerful and so beloved, you just knew it would ruin your life to come forward. So very few did. But for those who did come forward, instantly, as you can imagine, they were besmirched and derided as money grubbers, settling scores. You couldn't be the next Mrs. Nygaard, so nobody will. It was always that. And it was very believable. Because when you
Right.
had a guy like Cosby, it was not believable that he could have been performing all these awful things in another life. We would default to what we wanted to believe. And when it came to women, it was much easier to cast them aside and default to what you wanted to believe about Peter.
Yeah. So having this kind of personal connection to Peter and kind of, I always use kind of the metaphor when it comes to journalism, right? You're flipping over rocks and you never know what's going to be underneath it. Like, what did you find when you're flipping over these rocks? I mean, you probably had some tough conversations with people about stuff that you remember, as kind of like
Yeah.
knowing him and like, what did you find in these conversations with people about this?
Well, woof. For starters, those rape claims back in the 80s, they were real and they were true. They weren't women just out to settle a score or make a buck. Number two, he had an insatiable appetite for not just sex, but awful kink. I mean, he was involved in all sorts of sadistic stuff and a fixation with feces and just really, really awful, awful behaviors. And obviously, as he got older and older and less attractive, it became harder and harder to land all those Swedish looking models that he typically would zero in on. And so he sort of moved much of his deviant behavior to the Bahamas, where he had this massive $70 million esque lair, like a Swiss Family Robinson meets Robinson Crusoe meets Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And much of the brutal, crimes would take place there. And much of them would take place with young, sometimes 13, 14, 15-year-old girls who were combed from the poorest areas of the Bahamas with promises of being able to come to Lyford Key, the richest place on the island. Then they'd be drugged and locked in there with a Jurassic Park gate, and the attacks would happen that way.
I mean, he really is like an Epstein Island of sorts.
Yeah. Can I tell you something, Drew?
Yeah, absolutely.
My brother lives in the Bahamas, and so I'm there a lot to visit him and have been for the last 10 years. And Peter was always in the Bahamas, Uncle Peter. And I would call and say, I want to see, Lyford Key ends in Nygaard Key. He renamed the tip of it because he owned the whole tip of it. So I want to see, Nygaard Key. I just have heard such incredible stuff about it. I hadn't heard about the naked, swinging, crazy, bacchanalia parties that had been going on for years. I'd heard there were lots of parties there. Don't get me wrong. He battled with his neighbor, and I just thought it was a noise issue, and lifestyle issue. But and he was never there at the same time that I was. So it was like, oh, rats. I didn't get to go in and see, and more than likely would end up with a photograph with him, in my adult life. So I'm actually kind of happy in a way that I didn't. It's been flattened and raised, purchased by an anonymous owner and wiped out to wilderness. So I will never be able to see it. But lots of famous people were photographed with him there. George Bush, I mean, you name the celebrity. He was on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous multiple times.
Yeah.
There are pictures of me when I was a little kid with him, but thankfully no pictures of me now in my adult life with him. And I'm most certainly there would have been had I connected on the right weekends or whatever and been there.
Sure. So the new show starts with a series about Peter Nygard, and it's a weekly series. Is that right?
It's a 6-part series that I'm going to drop
Okay.
two of the first episodes the first week, and then I'll drop one every week after. Then I'll follow
Okay.
that up with Angela again, my best friend from childhood, who's got a lot of updates, and I've got some updates too.
Yeah.
Peter's been copying me on all of his emails from jail, and now he's
Yeah.
been moved to prison just in the last few weeks, around Christmas, 2024, and he wants me to, write a book and make a movie to repair his legacy. And I don't know where he's getting that idea, other than we're family friends. But I've always said to him, I'll never do an interview with you if I don't interview the other side. It's not what I do. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not a legacy, fixer.
Right. Speaking of what you do, I wanted to ask you, like we said, you grew up in Canada. When did you determine, or when did you realize that journalism was the game you were going to be getting into?
Age 14.
Really?
Age 14. Yeah, I remember the moment. I just feel like the luckiest person in the world that I had this moment. I was sitting in Mrs. Sharp's history class. Remember the desk, 2 from the front, just off to the right of her desk. And she was going over British history, which wasn't the most exciting history class. She was a good teacher, and we were in King John and Magna Carta. And I remember, and I only know it was King John and Magna Carta because I aced that on the exam that year in ninth grade, grade 9. And I remember kind of wondering, like, how does she know all of this? Like, how does she... Who wrote this down? Somebody was there and someone wrote it all down, and they've handed it, down many times. And here I am in the 80s, in a history class, and I get to learn because somebody bothered to record it. And I thought, wouldn't that be amazing to be on the leading edge of history, creating it and being the first person? Because in a way, it's like you're the best gossip in town, right? Like, I got a story for you. Did you hear?
Right, yeah.
So as a 9th grade, girl, that's probably what piqued my interest first, is that I get to be the one that breaks all this to everybody. But that was really the moment where I remember thinking. And then it grew from there because Beirut was burning, and I kept watching the evening news with my parents, the CBC Evening News with Knowlton Nash. And I thought, wow, that would be a hell of a job, being able to go overseas into all these different war zones, different countries where I could use my love of language, my ability to speak French, my love of current events, and my insatiable need to be heard and perform, because anybody who's on TV who tells you they don't have that, they're lying.
Yeah. Yeah, I like your frankness about it, because I think you're right that anybody that says that that's not part of the thing is probably not.
It's like, pick me, listen to me. Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
No, that's interesting because I feel like a lot of people kind of back into this business or kind of like accidentally fall into it somehow. So it's interesting to hear that you knew early on, and like I'm kind of the same way. It's the only thing I've ever really wanted to do, but like when you have that kind of focus early on, you're fortunate, right? Because you don't necessarily go through the period that a lot of people go through, which is like, I don't know what to do with my life, and I don't know what to major in, and like, so you just knew from 14 on, you're like, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, and I didn't waver. And I went through university pretty quickly. First of all, I started early at age 17, so by 20, I was in my first broadcast, TV news job. And in college, I had this plan where I would go and get my undergrad at Queen's University in Kingston, where Elon Musk went, by the way.
Really?
After me. And I would get a politics degree, and then I would do a master's in journalism and learn the ropes. But I really wanted to get my politics degree. I was really fascinated by current events and politics. And so while I was at Queen's and having too much fun and drinking up a storm and getting like B's and C's and failed one course, I thought, you know what? I'm really eager to get out in the world and get going. So I just plowed through the summers and got my degree and decided, to hell with the master's, I'm going to learn it on the job. And that's what I did. I learned the mechanics of television in Kenora, Ontario, population 11,000. And I was a cameraman when I started. And so I sort of went from cameraman to editor. and was editing the pieces that I was shooting in the field. And then there were 3 of us who worked there. So they're like, you got to report too. And now you got to anchor because Randy's off, And so that was it. I just kind of did every job there and learned, the rudimentary skills that I needed to sort of build on those building blocks later as I moved through all the Canadian cities and then emigrated to Texas.
Where in Texas were you?
Dallas, Texas, baby.
Okay, so Dallas is where your first U.S. market job.
Yeah, loved it there. I just loved it. Fox
Really?
4 News. Yeah, Fox 4 Texas, Fox 4 News. Yeah, it was great. I loved it. And it was like weird too, because that was a station that had just been taken over from CBS. So it was a Fox affiliate, brand new, and everybody was getting used to the Fox way and Ally McBeal and The Simpsons. And all these shows were sort of considered less than, by the other broadcasters. And I remember thinking, bullshit, these are awesome. This is the best television going. Why are they so short-sighted? Took a while for the rest of the country to catch on, but boy, did I have a baptism by fire though, because Bill Clinton was campaigning, and I knew so little about the way the American political system worked. I'm from a parliamentary country, and so learning the Electoral College while I'm reporting on it was really tricky, and people weren't particularly magnanimous in the newsroom to me. Instead, chose to use it against me that I was a bimbo, an idiot. What a dope. She doesn't even know that you don't lay charges, you file them, And I'm like, oh, come on, give me a break. But, this has not been a particularly kind industry for women coming through the 80s and 90s. It's way better now.
Yeah. I can't imagine those challenges for women, coming through. I mean, like, it's such a...
I believed it, though. I believed it. I believed I was a bimbo. Really? Yep. And I'll tell you why. And this is the whole, dichotomy of the Ted Baxter phenomenon. But, when you're young in this business, you don't know a lot. And so when someone calls you an idiot, you're like, yeah, I am, because I still don't know a lot. And when they call you a bimbo, it was just the vernacular that they used back then for women. It was standard. It was normal. It wasn't unusual. I didn't like it, but I didn't think that there was much you could do about it. What I didn't realize until later was how many of the men who are my age were just as dumb or dumber. And there was no polemic about them. There was no sort of standard go-to derogatory term for them. Even with Ted Baxter on the air, they weren't called Ted Baxters. They were just called go-getters. So the sad part is that it was so powerful that even I sucked it up and realized I thought, well, you probably did get the job because you got nice hair and teeth.
Now we're taking a quick break from the show to think about the year 2025. I cannot believe it's already 2025. Not quite where I thought we would be in life here. No flying cars. I'm unable to legally live on the moon. But we do know some things about ourselves that we didn't many years ago. One, sugar is bad for us. And as we get into the new year, I'm trying to make some changes to my life to help myself live a healthier lifestyle. One of those is eat healthier, eat less sugar. And our friend Nicole created Bella Bars to do just that. Bella Bars are great tasting nutritional treats with only 1 gram of sugar, 8 grams of fiber, 10 grams of protein, and they're low on the glycemic index, non-GMO, keto-friendly, everything this Dan Semitovich is looking for. There are 3 great flavors: blueberry muffin, cinnamon roll, and my favorite, lemon pound cake. I've tried them all, and they're all fantastic. Nicole worked with some great food scientists to find that intersection between great taste and health. You can find Bella Bars at thebellabars.com or search for them on Amazon. And when you buy Bella Bars, you're supporting Nicole and her small business. So it's always great to support a small business. As a small business owner myself with our show here, it means a lot. So again, check them out at thebellabars.com or on Amazon. I promise you'll love them.
I always think about people that work in television, especially in front of the camera, and like how that develops insecurity because you're so... Like, you're being looked at every single day. Your job is to be in front of everyone. And so, like, that only compounds insecurity. And I've always been kind of curious how that, how that all kind of plays out.
100%. I'm on a diet every fucking day, and I'm a size 8, 10, 12 on a bad day. I shouldn't be dieting, but I am I feel like I'm grossly overweight if I can't fit everything in my closet, and I've never ever changed, and I never will. I know it's got a hold of me by the throat. The other thing is I have zero patience, and I'm a total bitch because I've been through a lot of unfair, as I now realize how unfair it all was. So now I have zero capacity to take any more. So when I hear even a scintilla of it, it's like,
Well, you've also earned the right, though, too.
I mean, you know, I think the Lester Holts of the world have earned every right as well, and they're so gracious and lovely, and they still they maneuver in such beautiful ways. I just so wish I could be more like them. I feel like I'm pretty scarred and abrasive when I start to get a hint of that stuff. It doesn't happen a lot, honestly, in this day and age. I think you're right. Once you're one of the senior members of the broadcast force, more people are looking up to you than looking down on you. But when I see it and I smell it, and when I see it and smell it elsewhere, I am fierce, and I protect those who I see the same thing happening to because they're young or they're pretty and someone says some bullshit comment. I usually tear them a new one pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were in local, and then do you remember when you got the call to work in network news?
Oh,
kind
of.
Like when you got, you always hear about the call to the big leagues or whatever it was. Like, what was the moment that somebody came to you and said, your time is now. You're ready for this.
I didn't get that like big old gift wrapped moment. I orchestrated it. Honestly, I was coming out of Dallas. I'd been there 5 years. I did not want to sign another local deal. I wanted to get moving in national network news. And so I did a story for America's Most Wanted because John Walsh liked me and liked my work and ended up getting me to do a lot of like stuff for that show. And that's why Roger Ailes saw me, was because I was doing this stuff for America's Most Wanted. And then, I'm the Fox affiliate. And suddenly he's like, oh, who is that girl down there? So he called and said, "Whoa, why don't I know about you?" And I said, "Well, I'm looking to make a jump." And he said, well, he wasn't offering, right away to say, well, I'll bring you up here. I just said, I put the cart before the horse and said, I'm coming up to New York. I'm interviewing with NBC. Bullshit. I said, I got an interview with NBC, such and such a date. And he said, well, you got to come in and see me. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And then my agent, I told him to tell NBC I was coming up to interview with Fox News. And maybe while I'm up there, we should strike a meeting because I'll already be there and want to pay for a trip. So I went to, what was that store I used to shop at all the time? Loehmann's. It was all discount, women's like fabulous suits and stuff like that, all discount. I went to Loehmann's and I bought this banging blue suit. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to wear. I got the interviews on the same day, and they're right across the street from each other, Fox and NBC. And I bought my own ticket and I got my own hotel room and flew up and interviewed first with Roger, and he did all the things that you've heard: do a twirl, how do you vote, and all the garbage. And then as soon as I was, what's that?
What you're describing is like, it's what we've all heard about Roger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was gross. And I walked out of his office, and as I was down on 6th Avenue, my agent called my cell and said, oh my God, they're making an offer. And I said, I just walked out of there. And he said, yeah, but they're making an offer. And I said, well, I'm going across the street right now to NBC. And he goes, well, I'm going to let them know in advance. So I went over to NBC, and I didn't even have an interview with like the big bosses. I didn't have an interview with Elena Nachmanoff, with talent, or Andy Lack, the president. I had an interview with Cheryl Gould, who was, one of the executives in the executive office. And so I went into her office, and she was informed that, wow, that just happened. And that was quick. And she said, you got to come and meet everybody. So she walks me into Andy Lack's office, and he then grabs me after I talked to him for about half an hour and walks me down to Jeff Zucker's office, and then Elena Nachmanoff, and Zucker was the EP of the Today Show. And when I walked out of NBC, they bettered the Fox offer.
Yeah.
And so then my agent goes back to Fox, and what Fox was offering was kind of like, how about you come and work for us? I don't have real estate for you right now. We'll plug you in wherever, and as soon as there's a show, you get a show. What NBC offered was, we got MSNBC that's just going online right now. We want you to do a 3-hour show.
Oh, wow.
With 2 other co-hosts, and we'll up the money.
So they laid it all out there.
They laid it all out within like an hour. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So then Roger was told, all right, well, they're giving her real estate. So can you up the money or up the real estate or whatever? And he goes, I can up the money. I don't have the show yet. And so ultimately we went with NBC. And Roger was always really nice to me until I started doing well. And then he just took the piss out of me in the press. He was so mean. And I remember being so disappointed because I would send him Christmas cards and gift for his newborn child. And then I read while I was in Afghanistan that he was calling me an actress and a shitty journalist. And it's like, really? Because you tried to buy me, If I'm so shitty, why were you so desperate to get me on your network?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, his legacy is, I don't think
is what it is.
It is what it is, right? And so,
but Drew, that's the thing. Like, for anybody who's watching this who might be in, in business or trying to get ahead, don't wait for it. It's like the lottery. If you're just waiting for that big job to land all with a perfect bow tied on your desk, it's not going to happen that way. You got to be scheming. You got to be creative. You got to be strategic.
I love the, you told them, I'm coming up for an interview with NBC. I mean, you were playing.
It wasn't a total lie. I knew someday.
Right. Exactly. Right. You manifested.
I didn't tell him exactly.
I mean, you were playing the game relatively early. It sounds like you were ready for all of that, relatively
1999.
Early.
That was 1999 that I did that.
And so, obviously 9/11 happens and kind of, the world changes, but obviously so many people know about your work. Can you talk to me a little bit about 9/11 from your perspective, reporting on it, being there, and kind of the aftermath for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty life-altering experience, two-pronged, one as a journalist and one as a victim. I nearly died on that day, and I still have PTSD from it, and I think my personality changed. I think I got even more short and less patient after that day. I should have gotten therapy. I guess I didn't because I was overseas for a year after that, war correspondent. But when I came back, I guess, it was still the early 2000s and I don't think therapy was a good word. And so I just didn't. And fell into all these crying episodes all the time when they least expect it. And it's the most embarrassing and it's ugly cry. So it's not a good thing. In the victim sense, it was that shitty. And then I had this dichotomy of success in the professional side because suddenly, boom, I'd exploded onto the scene, and then I was overseas, right in Taliban territory, and people really wanted to know what was going on over there. So I was the eyes and ears, and we were so incredibly understaffed and understocked. I had zero resources over there. It was me, John Zito, my producer, Bob Lapp, my audio tech, and Craig White, my photographer. And the four of us are like a band of effing brothers to this day. I mean, I just talked to Zito yesterday. I talked to Bob the day before. I just was over with Craig White came over. He's been sailing for 10 years, and he came over, and I went and got on his boat. I had to pay some guy to take me out to his boat. But we're so close because of that experience. And it was just the four of us trying to put on an hour-long television show in a war zone every night in a different location. So the logistics alone, and we had nothing. We had a video phone. We didn't have a computer.
Right.
We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any smartphones. We had nothing. We had a legal pad with a pen and a sat phone. And that's how we put on an hour-long show every night under curfew, in danger. It was nuts.
God, I mean, no scripts, no. So you basically, the control room was like, Ashleigh's up, and they would just say go, and you would just go.
The way we did it, and it was a brilliant strategy that Megan Schaefer and I, she was the EP, sort of came together and figured out very, very quickly. I mean, necessity is the mother of all invention. Was that we would set up the sat phone wherever we were sleeping, and we would have a 1 hour call at about 10 o'clock at night. And in that 1 hour call, I would take my legal pad and we'd figure out the rundown. So open the show, say where you are, do a scene setter, tell us why you are where you are, do whatever show and tell you can. Like if you're right in front of the, American embassy in Iran, look at this, it's all, the emblem has still got the gunshots all in it, stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And then go to the top news of the day and hear a couple of bullet points. So you just ad lib that. Then throw to Martin Fletcher. He's in Tel Aviv with a new development of something or other. Then when you come out, let's tease to the next block. And here's the stuff. Here's the video that we're going to see. And I would imagine the video in my head and I'd tease to that, right? I would say, look at these cars all, falling into a massive bombed out crater. Oh, we're going to show you what it's like when these massive bombs are dropped in the middle of Kabul. That's next, So every block would be kind of like that, would be blocked out like that. 2 blocks we would have shot locally. So I would have done what the common parlance for this in television land is a stand up. And usually the reporter stands there for 20 seconds in the middle of their story and there's a building behind them and there's nothing else going on. I made my stand-ups a 6-minute walk, talk, show, explain. Walk, talk, show, explain. And we would shoot those with no editing because we didn't have editing gear. We had nothing. It was like, if I tripped, it stayed in, I just dealt with it as though I was live on television. And we would do these things. Case in point, I walked the entire length of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, showing all the points of interest, and translating the graffiti that's still there, right? All these years later, they update the graffiti and make sure it stays perfect every year. It's just awesome. It's like down with America, America,
Right.
And then when there was nothing to show for say 30 to 40 seconds of walking, that's when I would add in bullet points of the day that I don't have video for. So I'd be on camera still walking and I'd say, by the way, today the Iranians said this and and I'd have some notes. And then I get back to a new point on the journey where there'd be more and there's the window that you see famously in the video where they brought their door, where they brought them out, and that's what we do. 2 of those 6-minute pieces from wherever we were that day. Sometimes it was an interview with a prime minister or a sheikh or a religious leader or a hostage or a prisoner. I had lots of Taliban prisoners. And those were the blocks that would go in full and I would throw to them myself from the live location. But that was how we produced it.
What you're describing is so amazing because like for somebody like me, when I was growing up watching the news, like I was transfixed by that kind of thing. Right. And like what you're describing is amazing. And at the same time, like it sort of makes me sad because I'm like, I don't know if we're going to see stuff like that again. I mean, we will, but like what you're describing now in 2025 doesn't carry, I think, the same influence that it did in 2001, 2002. Am I wrong?
You see a lot of it online. Yeah, you see a lot of it on social media. But
which feels different though. Which feels different than like at the top of the 7 o'clock hour in front of the television with your parents while your mom's cooking dinner. Just it's a completely different experience.
Yeah, well, also there's the credibility that those news programs carried, and so everything you hung on every word. Now you're watching it on social media and wondering, "Wow, this is cool. I wonder if it's true."
Yes, right. And there's generations that are never gonna have, like I feel like my generation, right? And I feel like my generation, every house was one of 3 houses. You were Peter Jennings, Tom Brokaw, or Dan Rather. My house was a Tom Brokaw house. My wife's house when she was growing up, she was in a Dan Rather house, and like I remember the sound of Tom Brokaw's voice to me meant the evening has started. Dinner's almost ready. We're going to lay out for you what happened today. And that just doesn't really exist now. And it's kind of, I mean, everything changes and evolves, but it's just, it's amazing to hear kind of all that.
And I had the Canadians. So I had Peter Mansbridge and Knowlton Nash, and then Barbara Frum, David Frum's mother. If you know David Frum, he's George W. Bush's chief speechwriter, big television conservative analyst, one of the smartest men in the political spectrum of all time. Yeah. Just really smart. And his mom was Barbara Frum, and she was just as smart and just as badass.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've told this story about you before to other people, and what you're talking about with kind of basically doing the show this way with flying without a net is anytime somebody says, news anchors get paid a lot of money, et cetera, and I say, here's why. And I always harken back to when you and I worked together, and it was the Parkland shooting. And
Oh,
the folks at HLN said, you guys have to go live. We were supposed to go on at 8, I guess was when the show was supposed to go on, but it was like 4 or 5 o'clock. They were like, Ashleigh's going on and you guys are going to be live until we say stop. And I remember we were in the control room and we had no guests and we had a live picture of outside the school. And I said to you, we got a live picture and that's it. And you went for probably 37 minutes before you went to a commercial break. And I think
yeah.
maybe we had one person that you could toss to, like an analyst or something. But like, I remember thinking, this is why people like Ashleigh have the job that they have, because that is such an incredibly difficult thing. Like, that's where they earn their money. That's where they earn their keep, is like in these moments where it's like, just go, and you managed to fly the plane. It was pretty awesome.
And it happens all the time, honestly. Like, what I will always tell younger broadcasters who are up and coming: sit on your foundation and trust it. You've been through some stuff. You might be young, but you've still been through some stuff. And if you're slightly, edging into your first trimester of your career, start picking from those experiences. Start telling anecdotes. I once talked to, here's the crisis. There's the image of the school. And while you have nothing coming in, you say, I once remember talking to an officer who told me that it's the worst sound they could ever hear at the precinct. You're being dispatched to a school shooting. And when I remember looking into his face when he said it, and he meant it. And this is a guy who deals with serial killers. Like, you got to bring these anecdotal remembrances and color to the broadcast, because you're probably going to have 1 or 2 facts for at least 15, 20 minutes at some point in your career, and you're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah, everything becomes a layer, that you can then build upon for the next story, right?
Yep.
I mean, I've talked to people about, like, just like school shootings. Like, when that happens, there is a system that a news organization goes through on a story like that, because it's happened so many times before. And each time they learn a lesson, they apply it to the next one, to the next one, to the next one.
Yeah. And then you bring those back. You bring those references back. You say things like, when I covered Parkland in 1998 or 1999, not Parkland, sorry, when I covered Columbine in Colorado, in 1988, 1999, I thought it was such an anomaly. I thought there'd never be another story like this. I mean, this is what you're doing live, right? As you're waiting for more information to come in. And that's very referential for people too, because they think, I felt the same way, Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I know that you kind of made a pivot of some sort, in the news world, to the crime and, crime and justice reporting. That's where I have spent most of my time. I'm curious, from your perspective, why people are so intrigued with stories like the Menendezes, the, John Bonet, Casey, and all of these stories we all know. What is it that is so fascinating to people?
2 things. I think the first one is that, for the same reason we gravitate to reality TV, it shows the human condition and how different or the same you are with these people who are fabulous or awful. And so we're a bit transfixed by that. We like to be able to compare our situations and either feel better about them or feel worse. I don't know. When you look at the Kardashians, maybe you feel worse. When you look at the folks, tipping over tables on the Real Housewives, you feel better. So I think in that respect, we have followed, in journalism, we followed the trend that television has. Reality TV became huge. And so true crime is reality. And the second reason is, and this one I think is most important, at least it is for me. I think that as a human flock, right? I think we are always so confused about how somebody wanders so far outside of us, right? How did they end up so far outside the flock?
Yeah.
And which one among us is the next one? And how can we take clues from the one that's out there and figure it out before it's worse than the circumstance we're in? And I think that might be part of the reason we just are always on a learning trend about our fellow man. And is it going to get worse, or is it going to get better?
Yeah. I also think I agree with everything you said. I also think that there's a layer to it, a component of people are fascinated with when ordinary people go through extraordinary circumstances and like how they respond, how they react, how they get through. Some people don't get through.
Yeah.
Anytime there's a true crime story that happens, the first question to family friends is, how are you coping?
How are you
And I
doing?
think there's a
Yeah.
reason for that because people are curious about it.
Yeah. I mean, look at John Ramsey. Um, I don't think there's a victim anywhere on the planet who has gone through what he's gone through, right? Um, lost two children. Before he lost John Bonet, he lost his other daughter in a car crash. And not only did he lose his beautiful little 6-year-old princess, he was vilified and his family was destroyed. And, there's still a lot of people who believe he's a killer, and his wife died before this umbrella of suspicion was lifted. Like, yeah, I want to know how he's getting through it. That's one of the most resilient people I think I've ever come across.
Yeah.
But I also think back to, and this is such a strange anecdote, but I'll give it to you anyway. I grew up in Winnipeg. And if you've ever been to North Dakota, Fargo or northern reaches of North Dakota, I'm another 100 miles north. And so when I grew up, winters were very normally minus 30, and a bad day was minus 40, and a really good day was minus 17. That was a balmy day in February, January, February. And I would take the bus to school and waited at bus stops, and I had to walk home from the community center. And I remember the cold being so intense that I'd be in pain. Like my feet would be in pain, my fingers would be in pain, my face would be in pain. Had my arms up against my mouth to try to keep my lips and my nose from being in pain, and it was normal. And so I think back to the resilience that we kids develop, because never once did I say, I'm never going to live here again. It wasn't part of the equation.
Yeah.
Everybody was in this boat. Get over it, deal, And so I think there's an element of adaptability to all of us in a sense, but it is your grit that will determine how well, how quickly, and how successfully you adapt.
Yeah, there's an interview I did that will forever be seared in my brain, and I've talked about it before, but there's a woman in Wisconsin who lost all three of her daughters to their father. He killed all three of them. And I remember having a conversation with her. And this is a woman that in one afternoon, she lost every one of her children. And I said to her, I don't know how you managed to get up and move forward after that. And she said, Andrew, I didn't have a choice. And she's like, and I know that some people might think, how do I get up off the floor? How do I put one foot in front of the other? And she's like, I did not have a choice. It was the only option for me. And and really at the end of the day, it's quite a simple answer. And I'd never thought of it in those terms of like, I don't have a choice here. When something horrible happens and people have to move forward, that's the only way. And it was very simple, but it was also very profound. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's it. You got to figure out the path, because your old path was just, Dresden.
Yeah. And I remember bumping heads with people about, when I'd be working on stories like this, and there was like a lot of questions about like, we need more info about like the DNA and the crime scene and the blood. And I'm like, okay, yes, but like for me, one of the things that's intriguing about this area that we work in is like, it's human beings that are just going through something extraordinary. And the human being story to me is way more interesting. And like, I may zig when everybody else zags on that, but that's just kind of the way it is for me.
People do like it. There's always that balance between like the wildfires. Give me the facts before you tell me that someone is crying. Give me the facts about how many are out there right now. But there is that balance, because I think a lot of people do want to see the granular effect of those wildfires, right? Yeah. But that's the journalist's balance. You've got to figure out when to go from 30,000 foot view down to street level.
I'll ask you this before we wrap up, because I want to be mindful of your time. How do you see journalism in 2025 and beyond?
It's
I know
what
I said I
think
want to
about
be
every
mindful
day.
of your time. That's a loaded question.
I think about that every day, and I've been thinking about it every day for 10 years because I've seen the erosion of trust in, mainstream media. And there is no trust built yet on social media, and yet they're handing it over, unquestioned. And I can't quite get my head around why all of a sudden would you just be so hook, line, and sinker on social media when you've given it such thought in mainstream media? That has really depressed me. This was such an honorable job before, and now if you say I work in television news, it's the old lawyer treatment. You're treated like lawyers. I think it's going to get better because I'm a bit Pollyanna about it, and I work for News Nation, which is an unbiased network, and so I feel like we're doing the Lord's work amidst people who aren't. And I hope that the echo chamber media will get a clue soon that you may be getting some ratings, but you're literally eating away at the golden goose, So who knows? If they fail and we don't, then yay. But I still think that there will be a place for journalism and there will be a place for storytelling. And I think we're in the throes of a movement where as humanity, we will figure it out and we will realize what we really do need. And that is truth.
Ashleigh Banfield, I love your optimism. There's not a lot of it left in the world. You're fantastic, as always.
Right back at you.
Thanks for the time today. Bless you.
I love you, Drew Iden. Come and work for me again, please.